Welcome to the Speak Like a Leader podcast with John Bates. Welcome to the show. With me today is a young man that I've seriously got a man crush on this guy. I met him in a course creators course, and he is the founder of Big Later, which is the internet's most entertaining crash course on investing. And it really is. That's not just marketing fluff. He's also one of the pioneers of email-based courses, which are I think, a fascinating thing. I've done his email-based course. I've done a couple of them. We'll talk to him about that later. There's so much interesting stuff that comes out of what it takes to do an interesting email-based course. And you can find Big Later, his company, at biglater.com. And his name is Will Steiner, and you can follow him on Twitter at Big Willie Stein. And I am just really thrilled that you made the time to be here with me today, Will. Welcome.
Thanks, John. It's been really great. I mean, the man crush it's a two-way street. Absolutely. And it's been fantastic just to get to know you over the past, couple of months now. Like we've chatted a few times, and we're working on some content for you. And I went through your speaking course, and that was an amazing experience for me as someone who thinks a lot about communication. Just like there's the email-based course rabbit hole goes deep, so does the public speaking, so does the communication rabbit hole. So it's been fantastic to learn from you over the last couple of weeks here. Well,
thank you. Yeah, I think we've obviously both been having fun, which is great. So tell us first of all about Big Later, because one of the things that I think is a real problem just in the world at large, it certainly was a huge problem for me, is just financial literacy, just on the most basic levels. And some of the things that, with my focus on brains and how they work and the neurobiology and stuff, one of the things that I'm very, very clear on is that we do not have an intuition for compounding interest. It's why we don't mind credit cards, and it's why we don't invest earlier, and I think there are a lot of things like that it would just, people would be so much happier and so much better off, and the world would just work so much better if people understood the things that you talk about. So tell us a little bit about Big Later.
There are two problems, right? And I think everyone agrees on the first one, which is that learning about finance as an experience is miserable. It's jargon laden. It's dry. For some reason, nobody's using pictures to be helpful, right? But then there's also this other component of it, which is learning on the internet is really hard. You can learn anything on the internet, but most of us aren't equipped to say, okay, this is how I'm going to structure my approach. This is how I know what to trust. This is how I know, that I'm actually making progress. I'm doing the right thing. They're not getting their feedback loops. And for most young people, many people found themselves in a situation similar to the one that I found myself in, which was after 5 years, or let's say 3-4 years of living in San Francisco, despite everyone telling me it was going to be the most expensive place, I could possibly live straight out of college. It's I had 5 figures worth of debt. And I was like, what just happened? And I had to take a very austere look at my spending habits. And I was lucky. I got a sort of financial second chance because I was working in tech. And so there's a good earnings potential in those types of careers. And so, two events happened simultaneously. I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which is like the classic, I'm going to approach my life differently when it comes to money. And then I got a bonus at the same time. So I was able to pay off my debt and take a new view of sort of what I wanted my financial future to look like. I went through this months-long process of educating myself, going through the entire canon of classic, investing in financial literature, hundreds of hours of podcasts, many books, many podcasts, many Google searches later. I finally felt like I had a handle on things, and I kind of took a moment to reflect, and I was like, okay, this took me 8 months. Are any of my friends doing this? I don't think so. I mean, they're all working, they're having fun. We're going out, we got our hobbies and our activities, but they're not doing what I just suffered through. Right. And so
Yeah.
what I started to do is I'd bring friends over, they'd bring beers. We'd go through like an hour and a half's worth of stuff, right? Of like, hey, you should build a budget. Like these are the high level concepts, like build your budget, then you know what you can afford to invest. Hey, let's talk about these different account types and how they're treated from a tax, standpoint. And then what are some simple strategies you can use? And I sort of like, I didn't know it at the time, but I was building a curriculum.
That's so cool. It's so, Will, like that's one of the things I really like about you is that you would be the person who did that. What even made you do that in the first place?
The light bulb. When the light bulb went on for me, when it came to personal finance, it's like, okay, how do we help other people get that same feeling? Because it changes your outlook on life and it changes your outlook on what your future can look like. And so I would take that curriculum. I ultimately started taking it to the interns at Salesforce, which is where I worked for about 6 years. And recently in April left to do Big Later full time, but, and they loved it. The feedback was super positive. And such a big part of this is like, how do you make this entertaining? Because learning, especially with a subject like finance, it has to be as entertaining as it is informative. And so with the validation of the interns, my friends, I was like, all right, let's productize this thing. Let's go for scale. Let's figure out a way where we can distribute this on a much wider, to a much broader audience. And this is right when sort of the morning brew and the hustle were really hitting their stride, and email, people were developing this new relationship with email that was not, they'd already developed a new relationship with email, which was I have to respond to everything within 5 minutes as it comes through for work, which is super unhealthy. But now it's like, they're taking they're doing their morning routine and they're like, okay, I got 10 minutes. I'm going to read my email. I'm going to go through my newsletters. It's going to be, it's not going to be work related, but it's going to be enjoyable.
Yeah.
And so I thought like, let's ride those coattails, and we'll build, instead of a newsletter, we'll build a sort of a sequence that has a start and a stop, and we'll translate the entire curriculum into that sequence. Each email will be self-contained. It'll take about a month, and let's just make it as fun as we can possibly make it.
Yeah. And it really is fun. I think you've done a great job. Everything from the look and feel of it to the actual writing of it. I went and just, it's $5, right? I mean, the main one, right? So I just got that for everybody I could think of. I was like, oh, $5, give me 10. And I sent it out to my nieces and nephews, and I sent one to some people that I work with, and it's a great. I feel like for me, it's a great entree to say, hey, I really care about you. Will you go look at this? And then let's talk about it. Right. And then you've done the hard work of giving them all this stuff that they really need. And then I can go have a conversation with them around their particular stuff and what they think and what do you want to do? And how did this impact you and stuff? And I think it's really, really, really good. And I think you do take making it entertaining seriously, and that just makes it entertaining,
Well, and it's a process to get to that place where you found your voice Big Later is, I don't know, it's upwards of 50,000 words, the whole thing, right? It's 25 emails, each of which are about 800 words. That's like sort of like a cup of coffee's worth of reading.
Yeah. Which is nice. So let me just say that one thing that's nice is you say at the top how long it's going to take me to read it. That's good. And then I'm like, oh, 2 minutes? Of course I can do this. Okay, 3 minutes? Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. I'm just going to read the whole thing, which I think is just brilliant.
Well, it comes down to learning experience design. And I'm a total geek for that topic, and a huge part of delivering a good learning experience, whether you're doing it over email, you're doing it in video, you're doing it live in a cohort-based course or in person. It's like you have to set expectations. You have to give people a sense of what's coming. Something that I learned from our friend Andrew Barry, who is totally, he's right at the forefront of online education, is that our brains crave path, duration, and outcome. So it's like we want to know what's going to happen. We want to know how long it's going to take, and we want to know where it's going to take us. And if you can do that in subtle ways, even just within an email, things like read time, right? We put the key takeaways for that day's email right up at the top, and we finish each email with what's coming next. So just subtle, teeny little touches that make email a viable option when it comes to educational content.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think in some ways, like more powerful, I think it's combinations are great, right? Because people learn all kinds of different ways, but there's something so powerful about, there's something just that really was unexpectedly powerful to me about an email based course. And I think I'm certainly one of those people that gets a lot out of reading. I'm a big reader and I retain it well when I can see it. I can, but I was surprised at how good I thought that was, that whole experience. So
thanks. Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah, my pleasure. So what are some of the lessons you've learned? Like we've got people listening who are entrepreneurs, and we've got people listening who are working at large organizations and have really, top level positions. And we got people everywhere in between who care about leadership and communication. What are some of the things that you would say are some top level takeaways from your experience so far in that, just in terms of communication itself?
I am definitely going to draw more on my Salesforce experience than my Big Later experience for this, because I was fortunate enough to work for what I would consider, a person I would consider to be truly one of the greatest corporate leaders that I've ever witnessed. And we've talked about this sort of like magical equation, which is like your idea times your communication equals your results, right?
Yeah. Can I just give you credit for that? Because I am going big with that. But here's the thing. You have an idea, right? If your idea is just in your head and that's all it ever is, then it's a fantasy. But your idea multiplied by your ability to communicate about your idea multiplied by your communication, that's your actual outcome. And if that number of your communication is less than 1, then it's actually detracting from your idea. Like if you got $1 million idea and you multiply that by 0.5, well, now you got a $500,000 idea, right? But if you multiply that $1 million idea by 10, now you got $10 million. Like it's all, I really love that. And I give you full credit, Big Willie Steiner, the Big Willie Stein. I love that. But yeah,
I think it's super powerful. No, it's just a great mental model. And when I think about what drives effective communication, it's a lattice work of mental models. And I think the biggest one, the most important one, is incentives. And you have to know how to, if you're speaking your customer's language or your audience's language, and you know what's going to drive them to action, you're going to be able to tailor, your communication. And now, of course, there's add-ons and polish that you can incorporate. Like humor is obviously the most disarming addition, I think, to humor. If you can incorporate humor into stories that also sort of rely on metaphor, it's like, oh, that's a grand slam right there.
It's a grand slam, totally.
Some of the folks that I got to work for, I mean, we're talking about this is a 700 person business unit inside a 50,000 person organization. It is hard to retain employees at large organizations, but people love this guy, right? They loved it because he understood them probably a little bit better than they understood themselves, because for one, he had been in their shoes before. He was one of the smartest people that I've ever met, but also his ability to inspire and motivate came down to his communication style, which was, it was packed with humor. I mean, he loved his job and it came through, and he pushed people in a way that brought the best out of them. And I feel like I'm just spitting platitudes at this point about like, oh, this guy was so freaking great. But it's like, you would talk to him and he would make you want to do your job better.
Look, that's platitudes be darned, right? Like if somebody can do all this, it's magic. It is magic.
I reflect a lot on this guy. I mean, I think about him honestly at least once a month, and he just didn't take himself he didn't take his position, he took his job very seriously, but he didn't take himself too seriously. Yeah. Right. And a good example of this is like, I had to do this. I was on the strategy team for this guy. He was a sales leader. But he had a background in engineering and product. So really well-rounded, but I had to do this big presentation, and I had prepped all week for this. And I was like, all right, cherry on top, I'm going to come in, I'm going to be rocking a suit. I'm going to look I'm going to look my best for this presentation because I thought that that's what people cared about as a 23-year-old. And I come in and the guys, we've been working together for like 2 years at that point. They just kind of started razzing me a little bit. And I was like, well, you got to dress for the job you want. And without missing a beat, he goes, oh, if that were the case, I'd be dressed like a hockey player right now. I was like, at that moment, I was like, okay, there's more to this than taking yourself seriously, right?
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah. I love it. That's awesome. Can you share his name or?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, his name's Tony Rodoni, which is just a killer name. And he is this, he's probably 5'5", right? But a energetic beyond belief. Yeah. And I think when I think about what he was so good at is he got right to the core of the issue, right? Yeah. Whether we were talking to somebody in product about growth or why we weren't getting the results we were expecting, or whether he was talking with a rep about a deal, it's like he knew how to get right to the core of what was happening. He knew how to ask the right why questions that got them to think about, what was really, really happening.
Yeah.
There's a lot of distractions in that world, and if you can cut right to the core, and get others to use their brains, right? Not just provide the answers for them. Like that's, I think, a big component of leadership, especially corporate leadership.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me of a few things. One is just knowing your audience, right? And being really willing to just think about it from their perspective. And it's not so easy. And, it's funny because I read a study a few years ago that where they would like take a bookshelf and let people look at that bookshelf for as long as they want to really get everything on there, and then turn it around and face it away from them. And up until like early 20s, people are really horrible at seeing things from other people's perspective. Like teenagers, they do not actually cognitively, physiologically yet have the ability in their brain to do a very good job of seeing things from someone else's perspective. It's just really hard. And it doesn't fully develop in our human brains until like early mid 20s to be even able to do that. And then to actually get good at it and to practice that and to make it an ongoing thing. It's not something that I'm as good at as I'd like to be, even though it's something.
Let's give them drivers. Let's put them behind the wheels of 2,000-pound vehicles,
Exactly.
I don't know. Of course, when I was 15, I was like nothing, I wanted nothing more than to be behind the wheel of a car. But
of course
you then reflect and you're like, God, I was so dumb.
I can't believe they let me do that.
Yeah. I don't know. I think, if a teenager can then have their brain develop over the course of the next, 10 years or something, by 25, it's like, what's important for them to be able to do. And I'll tie this back to sort of like, for the employee or for the entrepreneur or for the, startup leader or even the corporate employee. It's like, what are you looking for in your people? And I think, I take this, this stems from my love of learning experience design, this book called the Building the Intentional University. It's about the Minerva Project, which is this really interesting new age, education program that's sort of like a replacement of the traditional college. It's built from first principles, totally ground up. It's like they got 25 million in venture funding early on, and they built this incredible thing. But they're the four things that they're like, this is what you should be able to do as you come out of college. And I think this applies to any position that's probably not probably applies to any position, but it's like, you need to be able to think critically, think creatively, communicate effectively, and interact effectively. And I think that combination, it's like no matter what you do in school, if you come out thinking like these are the skills that I want to develop, or if you're out of school and you're thinking, hey, where am I weak across this, these four things?
Yeah.
You will inherently improve yourself as an employee. That's how I think about it, at least.
Well, I mean, and as a human being, as an employee,
someone in a relationship. Yeah.
Yeah. I listen, should we go there as a social media consumer, as a news consumer?
Right.
I mean, like as all of it, like it's sort of those four things I think somehow got lost along the way here.
Couldn't agree more. It's a little, I think it's less doom and gloom than what we probably see on our Twitter feeds, but
Yeah.
that to me is the responsibility of higher education.
I think it's really, really well said. Here. It's the Minerva Project. If people did a web search, Minerva Project.
Yeah.
It also brings up for me this new kind of change of heart that I've had with Twitter, because especially, I was doing doom scrolling. I guess that's what it's called, right? Like and really to give myself credit, I was really genuinely felt like I was in a position where, with all the people that I talk to and all the things that I do, it was incumbent on me to really have a good grasp on what was happening during the pandemic. And it also just happened to be like tweak a lot of my interests and things. So I was really trying to stay on top of what was going on and all those kinds of things. As a side effect of that, I certainly had my moments of just like outrage retweets and this is so stupid retweets and, oh my God, can you? And so I didn't do too much of that, but I did some of that. But what I realized fairly recently, and I think it's a lot about, was being in ODCC and meeting people like you and being friends with people like Sir Stephen Wilkinson and all these people who are genuinely people that are just out to provide value and to make a difference and to offer stuff up freely. And I realized that, you can find whatever you want on Twitter. If you just set it up the right way, all you'd ever see were inspiring quotes, So, I mean, there's a downside to how customizable the feed is, right? But, and I think there's a really big downside to the AI overlords that are helping push that feed. But you can find whatever you want on Twitter and on social media, and you can interact with it however you want, So now that I've been, for the past month and something, trying to post almost every day, like I'm not beating myself if it's not every day, but I try to just post something every day that's useful, and it's text, and it's not all a big effort, and it's not some beautiful graphic. It's just, I try to put something in there close to every day as I can. And as I've been doing that, that's also what I've been seeing, because what you focus on is what you find, I guess. And your stuff and Sir Stephen's stuff. And there's people that I'm paying a lot more attention to now that are just positively handing good stuff out to the universe. And I think that's a much more pleasant use for me of Twitter.
Social media is a mirror.
Yeah.
That's all there is to it.
Good point. Yeah.
And it can be used and it can be abused. And I don't think anyone would have expected that, okay, I guess here's my comment on this is I'm worried, I guess, about the future, about younger generations, about this idea of digitally native. To me, just means you don't know what to do with yourself if you don't have your phone. Yeah,
that's scary.
And that is a scary idea. Like if aliens were looking down on us, they'd be like, oh, they must get their energy sources. They must get their energy from that little device they carry around.
Yeah.
Right? The amount of time that people spend using their thumb, that thumb motion of scrolling. Yeah. It's like, who knew that would be the thing that we spend so much time doing? Right?
Yeah. Well, and then, I think a lot of people have watched The Social Dilemma. And I genuinely feel like if we don't solve that problem, if we don't solve the social dilemma problem, we'll never solve another large, difficult, real problem as a species again. I don't mean to be too dark on this, in our time together here, but that's a really serious issue.
And it's all rooted in greed, unfortunately, right? Mm-hmm. Which is there's the things that make us human. Some of them are extremely beautiful: curiosity, our ability for empathy, compassion, and then you've got all the shitty stuff, right? It's greed, and that's, to me, that's one of the worst ones, because it just brings out the worst of our humanity. And I think a big part of what is the human experience and what is our sort of the purpose here is let's spend our time doing things that highlight and, what's the word I'm looking for? Like they shine light on the aspects of the human spirit that are worth celebrating.
Yeah. Hear, hear.
Those things that are unique to humans. Exploration, like I said, curiosity, compassion. But
yeah,
see, it's more fun to make in the short term to just make a shit ton of money.
Well, I mean, I guess it can be pretty fun.
I wouldn't know.
Yeah. I don't know quite exactly that yet either. But I definitely think that it was a bad move for us to spend so much money and give that money to the greatest computer programmers on earth and have them develop AI whose sole purpose ends up being to divide us because that makes more money for the platform, just a bummer. Not what I thought I was working on in internet, beta and 1.0.
Yeah.
But I did, sorry.
I was just gonna say, where are the sort of like the technological or the tech ethicists? And they're out there, right? But it's like we didn't
being fired.
We
by
thought
Google,
it was going to be,
yeah,
right. So we thought it was going to be AI that was going to do us in, but when reality, it's like the ability for information to spread unencumbered is just as dangerous.
Well, that allows us to be the ones to do ourselves in, Right. So and a lot of these things, I mean, I feel in a lot of ways, Will, that what I'm doing is trying to bring these Jedi mind powers that I know you know a lot about. I'm trying to bring those Jedi mind powers to the light side of the Force because the dark side already has them completely handled. The dark side is extremely good with these things, right? And the light side tends to flail a little bit. And, I think it's really important for people who have, who really want to make a difference in the positive sense, right? Bring transformation to the world. That's just good stuff, to really focus on understanding the biology and the neurobiology of communication and understanding what works and really thinking about their audience and speaking to them in ways that will motivate them to action and things. So what are some other things that you out of the email courses or out of your experience at Salesforce that you think, what are some of your creativity techniques and thinking about your course techniques and writing techniques that you could share with us?
Creativity techniques. I try to read a lot. Like, I think I think writing is a great medium for communication. And if you want to be a good storyteller, which is one of those things that it's like, if you want to communicate effectively, you have to have great stories. You have to read great stories and you gotta read the greats, right? That a lot of whom are kind of like, I don't know, I feel like the classics are kind of coming under fire in sort of modern curriculums, but that's the easiest productivity hack. Or creativity hack. I think also, what's nice about this environment or this, like, I guess the creator economy, passion economy, whatever you want to call it. It's like the more effort you put in, the fewer dead ends there are. So long as you're putting, if you're a charlatan and you're like the guy selling courses on how to sell more courses, right. Get out of here. But I think there's a lot of genuine people who have incredible expertise and perspective and now have this platform to share it. But, having a great product and then distributing that product effectively and marketing that product effectively are all unique skills. And the sort of the person in our shoes has to do all those things. You have to build a perspective. You have to create a product that packages up that perspective in a way that's meaningful to the people who you're trying to sell to. Then you have to market it and sell it. And that's a lot. And, I'm definitely still figuring that out, right? It's like I can take everything that I know about B2B sales, right, from my experience with Salesforce, and I'm lucky to be able to apply that to Big Later because now, we started as a consumer product and now we're selling to businesses as a financial wellness perk. And so I feel very fortunate to have gone through it from the strategy side of things to see sort of what the sausage making looks like to create a great B2B sales organization. But marketing myself and, the whole concept of build in public, I think has gotten a little bit perverted over the last, you know,
Yeah. Say a little bit more.
There's just
a nice side to that.
There's a lovely side to it. But there's a shape to these economies, right? It's like you have some new way of making money emerges. Early movers who, with good intentions, can build massive audiences and have huge success. And then latecomers who have a lot to offer still, but they have to fight back or wade through the sea of charlatans, of opportunists, right? Of scammers who then sort of tarnish the brand and in a way turn what was maybe like the creator economy into the meme economy, right?
Yeah.
And it's just part of it, right? So it's like our job has become harder because the brand of creator is undergoing a bit of a siege from folks who are out to make a quick buck on, you know, they're the sort of the scammers of our age.
Yeah, it is. You know, I mean, for anybody that's not deep geek on this, like we are, Will, there's a term, the creator economy, and people have been doing online courses and people have been doing YouTube tutorials for a long time. So it's not brand new, but I do feel like we're at a watershed moment here. Like this is yet another big step into this, because in the economy of people providing tools, you know, if you think of the creator economy as miners, it's like all of a sudden the tool makers have caught on, right? That there are a lot of miners out there. There are a lot more miners than there were. And so all of a sudden you're getting just a plethora of community tools and course creation tools and marketing tools and all that kind of stuff. And I mean, in a way, it's a really wonderful, wonderful time to be in this. And it's also just incredibly confusing. And like you said, there are a lot of charlatans, and there's just when anything gets attention, you know, it's like all of a sudden just everybody crawls out of the woodwork, including everybody. So it sort of feels like that right now in the world of creating online courses and getting those out to the world. So if that's not the world you're in right now, that's what Will and I are talking about. And I think in the long run, even in the short run, there's a great benefit to this for just people who are interested in learning things and people who are interested in lifelong learning. And so,
absolutely. And it's hard at the end of the day. It's like, it's doing all the things that are required to make a living off of your educational content. I mean, even, this translates directly to tech. It's the same shape, right? Where it's like at the end of the day, you're going to have this sort of Hershey's Kiss distribution of a couple folks at the tippy top, and then a smaller group that have made it, that are doing really well. And then a lot of people, I don't know if the Hershey's Kiss or the bell curve is the better way to describe it, but it's a persistence very much required for this. I mean, I've been at it with Big Later for 2 years now, and, we're just starting to have, building takes a lot of time, especially when everyone's part-time, but, the persistence
you're having some big success, I think, with, organizations that want to give their employees some financial literacy.
And not necessarily because it's out of the goodness of their hearts, but this could be one of those things that seems like a nice to have. But when you realize the impact that a lack of financial literacy has on your bottom line via,
it's huge
when it comes to attrition. Right? Yes. Like my personal story is like, I almost left Salesforce because I was looking for that gig that was going to pay me, I don't know, 10K more, because I was a dumb kid who didn't know I wasn't taking advantage of my HSA. I hadn't been putting money into the employee stock purchase program. Like I was not getting my full 401k match. I was just, you don't know, no one teaches you this stuff. It's a failure of the educational system. And now employers have to deal with a problem that they didn't create.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that when you've got employees with financial literacy, they're doing better things with the money you give them, and they're happier and they feel more secure and they're less stressed. I mean, if you're on a SEAL team, you you don't have all kinds of weird outstanding debts, and you don't have all kinds of stuff. Because if you've got that stuff going, you can't be fully present on your missions. They've got to worry about you as a potential target for something, So like the more anyone on any team has their stuff just dialed and handled and together, the better that team's going to be, and the better that individual is going to, the more they're going to be able to contribute to that team. So I think that's huge.
Yeah.
And again, it is a failure of the education system. I think it's, it's kind of weird because we all have such a young relationship with money. Not all of us, right? Some of us don't, but the vast majority of human beings have this very young kind of scarcity, kind of scared relationship with money. And, even when we get older and more sophisticated about it, it's still that same thing. And to get to get that to a more mature place, and to get that to a place where people feel like they're more in control of what's going on, and they understand what's going on, and they're purposeful about it, it just changes everything in life. Because, one of the things I think so important about what you're doing, Will, is that money of itself, big deal, right? But money is actually everything in one sense, because it's how I put the roof over my family's head. It's how I feed them. It's how I, get to show them important things in the world. It's the route to everything that matters. So it's not money that matters, but money is the route to everything that matters. And so it's just one of the most core big deal things. And yet I think the vast majority of people, including myself, I'm not saying that I have this dialed. We have this young, fearful relationship with it that just doesn't help us at all. And it's so important, which is why I love what you're doing. You bring some humor to it. You don't take yourself too seriously. You make it fun. You make it approachable. Around you, it feels handleable, right? By myself in the dark, thinking about my bank accounts right now, it could get very overwhelming. So I think that's a another really important aspect of the communication of big later for you.
How many hundreds of millions of dollars are flowing into financial wellness programs right now?
Yeah.
That ultimately are going to miss the mark, because financial literacy or financial education precedes financial wellness. And Sir Stephen Wilkinson, who has got an amazing workshop course material on financial fluency for business owners, has figured out this incredible way to make balance sheet and financial statements accessible through conversations around art. Yeah. Believe it or not, he has this fantastic metaphor, which is money, or financial education. There's are your boots, right? If you're going out on a really long, voyage or a hike or something like that, it's you need to have great boots. And I'm probably butchering the metaphor, but the point is the money is not the point, right? The point is to get to that view where you're wow, this is a beautiful sunset, and this was such an enjoyable walk. And it's if you're wearing, flip flops, and you got to walk 20 miles to get to this destination, it's going to be miserable.
Yeah.
He would say it so much more eloquently with his British accent, and I'm sure if he hears this, he's going to be shaking his head. But that's the gist.
I think you got the point, and I think that that's the other thing that's really cool about this economy, is that when you do get past the charlatans and that kind of stuff, the core of this is just a bunch of people who are just really lovingly trying to share something important with the world, and I think it's one of the resonance points that I have with TED, because at TEDx events and at TED events for years and years, I would say to people, gosh, I love being here. I love being around other people who care that much too. And I kind of think this is a similar thing, You care that much too, Will, and Sir Stephen cares that much too, and Andrew Barry cares that much too. And it's just nice to be around people who are putting that foremost in their minds and foremost in their lives, and just going after it and making it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's inspiring, right? And in the same way that it's inspiring to work, to have an amazing manager in a corporate setting, it's like the people that you ultimately spend your time with, that's everything for the joy that you're going to experience in your life and in your careers. And I feel like I was extremely fortunate to have wonderful managers at Salesforce, and work on, the folks that are part of Big Later are just like accountable, and they're interesting, and they're interested, and they just, everyone does what they say they're going to do. And
so great.
It's just this virtuous cycle. And so, I mean, one of the things that may be more relevant to your audience here is just like the, is hiring, right? And we hire for work, we hire our friends in a way, right? Like we put them through an interview process, and sometimes we have to fire them. But I think hiring and onboarding is one of the most underappreciated and underserved aspects of work. And it's one of the highest leverage. It is the ultimate growth hack. Yeah. And if you don't have an incredibly rigorous standard for your hiring, and you don't have a process that as you grow your business that you can't repeat, right? For the folks that, and the parallels between this and just regular, work and regular life here are endless. Like if you have a good hiring process and your friends have a good hiring process, your friends of friends are going to be interesting people, and the circle that you surround yourself with is going to be filled with really fantastic folks.
Yeah.
So I think we have built hiring processes for ourselves in our lives, and the act of building, whether it's a course or a company or product, like that hones your perspective on, it's like helps you understand more about who you want to hire, whether it's into the professional world or into your life.
Yeah.
But we've all put in the work.
Great. Yeah. Have I told you about the final test to become an astronaut?
No.
I think you might like this. I definitely want to hear. I did a training, and actually, side note, it was at the NASA astronaut beach house. There's actually one beach house left on that whole beach at Cape Canaveral, and that's the astronaut beach house. And that's where the astronauts go with their families the night before their missions, and they have a barbecue and hang out and just get to be with their loved ones. So it's really hallowed ground. It's the last place some people ever saw their loved ones, and it's really a magical place. And after this training, a couple of the astronauts came up to me and they said, "Hey, John, would you like to know the final test to become an astronaut? We think you might be interested." And I was like, yes, of course I do. So it turns out that obviously to become an astronaut, you got to pass a lot of tests, right? So you get this whole binder of all the tests that you passed, the spinning around test, the, geology test, the astronomy test, all the tests. And you get this big thing. And the final test is that you get invited up to the astronaut conference room, and which is really cool. I've been in there and done trainings in there. It's every mission patch from everything ever that was manned, all around the walls, and like the original stuff, and like, this is another magical place. And you get to go in there, and there's this huge round table. It's just cool. And all the other active astronauts are sitting there at the table, and you walk in and they take your big old binder and they toss it on a side table and invite you to sit down, and you just hang out and talk for like about an hour or so with everybody. And then they say, "Okay, time to go," give you your binder back, show you to the door. And as the door closes behind you, this is the final astronaut test. That table of active astronauts talks about whether or not they like you. And even more important than do they like you is, do they think you are likable? How likable are you? Because you're going to be up there on the space station, crammed into a really tight space with them and astronauts and cosmonauts from all over the world, right? So you're representing the US. So that was a huge watershed mental moment for me. I was like, okay, if that's and listen, if you don't pass that test, doesn't matter if you passed all the other tests, you don't become an astronaut, And I was like, that's really good for hiring. That's also really good for like life, who you let in your life. That's just good everywhere, And I think it gets really tempting as a startup to go for that person who's got all the degrees and went to the right schools and worked at the right places. But man, if they're a jerk, jerks become much more toxic under pressure, you know, and there's a lot of pressure in a startup or also in a big corporate environment, right?
One of the most fun reads as far as like books that were gifted to me was Chris Hadfield's An Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth.
Oh, that's cool. I haven't ever read that. I got to find it.
It is packed with amazing stories.
Oh, right? That's cool.
And yeah, like you're up there with, and there are many more life or death moments than any other possible, you know, place or condition that you could ever find yourself in.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so decision making, critical thinking, creativity, communication, and it, you know, you're totally right. It is an international, this place where you're up there with Russians, and it doesn't matter what the politics are down on Earth. It's like, you don't want to die.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the camaraderie between American astronauts and Russian astronauts, and well, I guess Chris is a Canadian, but it's like the camaraderie there is incredible. It's
incredible. I know personally from stories that I've heard from people like Chris Cassidy and Karen Nyberg, you know, like all those things fall away. It's one of the things that they all say, you know, and they all feel silly because they think everybody else already said it. And I'm like, it doesn't matter. There's so few of you. You should all say the same thing all the time. It doesn't matter. But they're like, you know, you can't see the borders from up there. All you can see is it's one thing and it's our only thing. And there ain't nothing like it anywhere close, you know, and that camaraderie of the space station is really inspiring, I think, you know, and you're right. And the Russian astronauts are, you know, the impression I get of the cosmonauts is what they call them, is that they're just super freaking funny. They're good dudes and they're just hardcore and all heart and very funny, you know? So I don't know why I get that particular impression, but from all the stories that I've heard.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I don't know, like humor is one of those things that disarms.
Yeah.
And to the extent that you can incorporate it in every, you know, in your life, and you have an amazing quote about humor that I'll let you share, but it's like, people have a weird perspective on what is required to be funny, and like that you have to have jokes and you have to have one-liners and you have to have whatever, but it's like, no, there's funny stuff everywhere. Right. Yeah. And if you have to train yourself to see it, right. Yeah. Or you have to, and I feel like, look, my parents were goofballs.
Yeah. That's awesome. But, you know, that saying is that I think the one you're referring to is, you can't put humor into a speech. That's the bad news. But the good news is you can find the humor that's already there. And Will, I think that's one of the things you're really good at in this course. Is there any, I mean, that's pretty clear, but is there any way we could unpack that more? Or do you have any thoughts on that beyond?
Sure. With finance, especially, and with learning in general, like another one of those things that I've taken from the Minerva project is that there's two things that really like make learning sticky. And that's, you know, the idea of having to think through something. So having to do an exercise or take an action or apply it. And then, the second one is like making associations with your life, to your life. And so, a good way, making new associations and applying those things to your life. So, metaphor becomes a really powerful tool for this. So we use a lot of metaphor when we're talking about financial concepts because it decouples it from the jargon and attaches it to something conceptual that we're familiar with. So one of the examples that I can use, that's when we talk about public companies and like publicly traded companies, we introduce the idea of financial statements and the fact that, like, you know, financial statements are basically like a report card, but when you're publicly traded, you can't hide your report card from your mom.
Right.
You know, because you got to air out your laundry, clean or dirty. And that's just one of those things. It's like, if metaphor is a great opportunity to use humor, and it's low hanging fruit for the most part.
Well, and like and metaphor again is so powerful, right? It's one of the key things, stories, metaphors, similes, that is how our brains work, no matter how logical we think we are. And when you say, because look, I don't like financial statements. Like, I don't look at that, it's not interesting or exciting to me. But when you tell me that's the report card for the company that I've got an investment in, I become more interested in looking at their report card. Right. And it is funny that they can't hide it. You can't hide it from your mom when you're a public company, which makes me chuckle as I reconsider being more willing to look at financial statements. Right.
Right. This was what we have no real moat here, honestly. I mean, other than the fact that humor is our moat, and humor is not super, it's not the most, impenetrable. It's not that deep, right? Another person who's funnier than us could come along and recreate Big Later if they wanted to put in the effort. But what a lot of, who doesn't have much humor are like 401k providers. It's like, so we're betting on the fact that, like I said before, you need to approach learning, especially learning about finance. It has to be as entertaining as it is informative. And people, especially younger generations, just aren't going to be satisfied with a quarterly 401k, lunch and learn with your 401k rep, right?
Yeah.
Especially in a remote world where you don't even get the free lunch.
Right.
So,
yeah.
That's what we think we have to bring to the table, but we have to convince people that it's not enough just to check the box to say, hey, here's 100 links that are attached to your knowledge base that we got access to through T. Rowe Price, and now you can go read them all, and we've done our job here.
Yeah. Yeah. No, no, that just pushed them further away, actually. So the other thing that I think is a pretty big, deep moat, Will, is just your love for people and your love of this. So, that counts for something. And it's very obvious. I think anybody that's still with us on this podcast is clear that that's for sure true. So is there anything else that we should talk about, or anything else that you maybe thought about while we were talking about something else that we should just revisit before we wrap it up?
I think we covered a good bit of ground here. I'll just add a comment to the last little note that you said. One of the most rewarding things about working on Big Later, and trust me when I say that it's hard to make money on a one-time, $5 product.
Yeah.
We've sent thousands of people through the course, and this constraint has forced us to get really creative with how we monitor, how we sustain ourselves as a business, which is why we're now going B2B. But there is the thing that has just kept us going through all this, which it's fine. Everybody on the team has a full-time gig, and we meet once a week and we get our shit done and have pushed this thing forward. But it's like the feedback that we get, the reviews and the responses when folks have gone through the course. And it's like, it's just momentum, and it is inspiring, and you can see that we have done our job, and people are saying things like, this has never been as easily digestible as it is through Big Later, or like, I love that this was in bite-sized pieces, like the validating the format, validating the voice, validating the approach. It's one of those rewards that you only really get when you put the effort into building something that is a reflection of you. Yeah. And that's what I love I love the working in tech, and I loved working on, especially in like B2B, and Salesforce was amazing, but it is really rewarding to put that extra side project energy. That was like 5 a.m., I'm gonna work from 5 a.m. to 8 a.m. on my side project, then I'll go to work, right? It's like, once you've built something that's a reflection of you, it is really, really satisfying to hear people say like, this has had a life-changing impact.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. It's one of those things that keeps you going, doesn't it?
Definitely.
Awesome. Well, Will, it's certainly great to have you. Thanks for coming and sharing all this with us. And, if you are listening to this and you're interested in getting your TED-like talk ready to go, or if you just want to get your bunch of stories together. They're what I call your leadership stories, your origin story, and then all of your leadership stories. We are doing an event called the Speak Like a Leader experience. And we run those several times a year. It's an 8-person cohort, and we will take you through 10 weeks from start to your TED-worthy talk or whatever TED-like talk that you want to create. And as you've heard from Will, having those stories and sharing those stories just makes all the difference in the world. So if you want to go check that out, it's at for education, ed.executivespeakingsuccess.com. And Will, I really, really appreciate you. I appreciate you in my life. I also really, really appreciate you coming here and sharing all this fun stuff with us on the Speak Like a Leader podcast. And is there anything you want to say before we go?
Thanks for having me, John. If anyone wants to learn more about email-based courses, which is like, that's a deep rabbit hole. They can also find some more of my material, my educational material at emailbasedcourse.com.
Emailbasedcourse.com.
Just
Fabulous.
literal as it gets. Yeah.
Very good. It's a great URL there. Emailbasedcourse.com. Okay. Well, Will, thanks so much for joining us. And to you listening, thank you so much for joining us. I will see you next time. And I really appreciate your time and attention. Thank you for joining the Speak Like a Leader podcast. Go be awesome.